Good afternoon, everyone, especially to the young students out there. My name is Maria Cristina Bawagan, and they call me Tina for short. I was an activist since I was third year high school, so I must have been around 15 or 16 years old at that time. I studied at Maryknoll College, which is called Miriam today. And since my activist days in high school, I continued until college. By the time I was first year college, martial law had been declared. Congress was shut down. Media was controlled. No one was allowed to criticize government. And for this reason, activists were forced to go underground. I would like to acknowledge the students of Philippine Science High School who came up with this poster that you can see on the screen. It says martial law. These students studied some primary sources about martial law, and then they came out with original poems which they put up on posters along the walls of our school during Humanities Festival last November. So I would like to credit them for this poster, which I am using as part of my cover page, because it is the period which I will be discussing with you right now. I would also like to acknowledge the Commission on Human Rights, because this Commission on Human Rights had a martial law files project. And through this, they interviewed many victims of martial law, some of which were the women that you see there of Sultan Kudarat in Mindanao. These women claimed only in 2014 that their husbands were killed, around 1,000 of them. It was a massacre, in fact. And the women and their daughters were subjected to rape. I would also like to thank the organizers of this forum because they invited me to speak on the topic, and this was their suggestion: revisit, not revise. And because of this title, I was obliged to research on the meaning of historical revisionism. I am sure that many of you have seen on the internet and in the rallies slogans which say no to historical revisionism. But what exactly is historical revisionism? When does it become questionable? After research, I discovered that historical revisionism is actually legitimate if it is supported by facts. So for instance, a writer sees a new perspective and wants to write using the point of view of a certain marginalized sector, that is okay, and that is fine. If there are changes to history that must be done, that is very much okay. However, it becomes questionable when the writer claims, has a thesis, but does not substantiate it with facts or with evidence, and if that writer totally denies or ignores the whole bunch of facts or evidence that had already been proven in the past, then it becomes a problem. It becomes denialism, or more correctly, distortion. Let us cite some examples. In the Philippines, I'm sure many of you have watched the film Coil. This is one example of historical revisionism because a large number of facts about the revolution were still there. However, it now portrays the hero as not someone who is perfect, but rather someone who has his own frailties, his own flaws, and his own weaknesses. Now let us take a look at an example of denialism. And this is Imelda Marcos' claim that martial law was a benevolent society, it had a benevolent leadership, and it was peaceful and democratic. And let us show the fact. I was personally arrested without a warrant during martial law. I was 27 years old at the time, and I was in a house in Muñoz, Nueva Ecija. And when they arrested me, they blindfolded me. The soldiers blindfolded me. They handcuffed me. They pushed me into a car, put my head down so that no one would see, and then our car went to a safe house. A safe house is a place where the prisoners or the detainees are tortured. And in this place, I could not see where I was. They put me on a chair, and one of the officers kept on asking questions to my face. Every time he would ask a question, I would give the same answer. Why? Because if I did not stick to the story in my head, that would mean that they would arrest other activists, and these other activists would be subjected to torture as well. And the cycle would never end. So question after question, if they were not satisfied, I would receive a slap on my face, left, then right, left, then right. It was painful, and I screamed and I shouted, but they would not stop. At times, they would hit hard on my thighs, so hard that they eventually turned black and blue. At other times, they would clap very strongly on my ears, and this is called pompiang in Filipino. Very hard clapping, and it is very painful. And today, only since last year, I felt the effect of this trauma on my head. Every now and then, I suffer from hemifacial spasms, and my doctor asked what trauma I had experienced before, and it's the only one I could say. And he said that was it. Sometimes it takes decades to take its toll on the physical body. And then after some time, they started to tear my duster, and a sharp object was slid through my chest to threaten me, but still, I stood my ground. At one point, I really felt that I had my menstrual period, so I asked permission to get a piece of cloth to protect myself. They allowed me to rummage through my clothes, but I was still in blindfolds, so I wore that piece of cloth in front of all the soldiers, and then I went back to my chair, and they started asking questions again. And so question after question after question, it almost never ended. So I said, I have my menses, it's a problem. And then my blindfold was becoming loose, so I could see. I actually saw someone there, someone sitting out there while I was being tortured. But then I said, my blindfold is loose. So the person who was interrogating me suddenly tightened it. Looking back, I was wondering, why did I tell them that it was loose? Wasn't it silly? But looking back, it was a wise move, although I had not thought of that in the first place. If I did not tell them that my blindfold went loose, it could have fallen off totally. And what could have happened? They could have killed me right there and then, the same way they killed so many other detainees. So I was lucky. Now, it was about midnight when the hardship ended for the evening. The officers left the safe house, and 2 soldiers remained. And when they remained, they lay on either side of me while I was lying down at the center, still with my hand on the handcuff to the chair. And then one of them said to the other soldier in Ilocano, maybe she told us that she has her menstrual period so that we will not touch her tonight. And the other one said, yes, I guess that's the reason. But anyway, we went to sleep. The next morning, I was awakened by the cock crowing, and I asked permission to go to the bathroom. They led me to the bathroom, still with my blindfolds on. And when I was done, I went out. and they let me lie down once again with my blindfold and with my handcuffs. And then the soldiers continued the interrogation. Same questions, and I gave the same answers. So they started to molest me, and at one point, they even put a long object, inserted a long object into my private part. And I screamed as loud as I could. But again, it seemed that no one could hear, except for a train which I heard passing by. Eventually, I heard a voice on the walkie-talkie of one of the soldiers. And the voice said, "Please ask if her name is Celestina or Cristina." I was so relieved. What did that mean? I had not given my name at all till that moment. And I said, Mama was able to contact someone from the government. My father, when he was alive, was a naval officer. So my mother knew people in government, and even Ferdinand Marcos personally. And I was so relieved. When the soldier came down and asked me, is your name Celestina or Cristina? I said, my name is Cristina. And the torture stopped totally from that moment. But for others who did not have connections, some would become part of the disappeared. Eventually, the officers returned, and one officer held my hand and said, "What happened to you last night?" So I relayed my ordeal, my nightmare of the evening and morning. And he said, "Who did this to you?" And I said, "You did." And he said, "No, I left early last night." I said, "You did. I know your voice. You were the one questioning me. You were the one hurting me." I was very sure of that. This is a picture of myself in the middle. I was just 27 at that time. Mama is beside me, and my aunt on the other side. And it came out on the news that I was molested and tortured. This is a picture of Mama and me in a hearing in Muñoz, when the judge said she can go out on bail. We were all very happy and jubilant with that announcement. However, Mama said, "Tina, let's go back to Camp Olivas and let's get your clothes." "Okay, Mama," I said confidently. So Mama drove the car with me beside her, and my 2 high school nieces joined us. When we got to the camp to get my clothes, the camp commander said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, you cannot take your daughter home." "Why not?" said my mother. "She's out on bail." "But ma'am, the president has just signed this order. It's called the Presidential Commitment Order. And by this, the president can indefinitely detain any of the activists that he wishes." So my mother was so indignant, and she stayed on with me until that evening. And finally she said, "General, if you do not release my daughter this very moment, I have a hotline to the president, and I am going to call him right now." And the camp commander believed her. So while we were going home, I said, "Mama, do you have a hotline to the president?" She said, "No, not at all." So my mama was really courageous, and she saved my life because of her guts. It's not easy to admit that one is a rape victim. There have been many rape victims who to this day cannot tell their story because there is a stigma attached to it, like these women in Sultan Kudarat. One of them finally told her story to the Commission on Human Rights, and the military was present. And the military official who was there apologized on behalf of his fellow soldiers who had raped them. And when she told her story and her Muslim husband learned about it, he eventually left her. So it was very sad for this lady. These ladies at the Supreme Court, just before Marcos was buried at the libingan ng mga bayani, petitioned that he not be buried there as a hero. The lady beside me is Hilda Narciso. She experienced gang rape. She goes around telling her story for the sake of all the others who cannot tell their own story of rape. June and Jan, they are part of the Kimpo siblings. June was my first husband. As a teenager, he organized people from Tatalon, the community in Tatalon. In a rally, they were all arrested, and June was tortured in Camp Panopio, in Camp Crame. Jan Kimpo, his brother, was also incarcerated along with Liliosa Hilao. He was tortured heavily, electrocuted, and also burnt to a crisp. His skin was burnt to a crisp. Jan eventually disappeared. At age 23, he could no longer be found, and he is considered one of the desaparecidos. Eta is my sister. She is at the center of the photo. She was one of the 5 arrested, and all of them were subjected to electrocution and the electric shock, water cure, which was called Nawasa, electric shock, which was called Meralco, and also sexual molestation. They all heard each other screaming while they were being tortured. That in itself was torture. It seemed to never end. There have been 75,000 and more who have claimed that they were victims of human rights abuse, and the massacres were the worst of them all. Now, the challenge for the youth of today: the future is yours, the young ones at the back, and you have the power to build it. It is within your power to revisit the martial law, period. There is so much material that you can use, and there are so many URLs I left with the organizers, so please check with them. Raya School came out with their own place on martial law. You, the youth, can check out the very viable data. You can compose, create, and perform. Come up with songs, with plays, everything, sabayang pagbigkas, like our students did at Philippine Science High School. They put up posters, they came up with poems, they eventually presented on stage original poems. The youth of today have the power to honor the real heroes, like what our students did, marching to Bantayog ng mga bayani to honor the Pisay martyrs. And they lit candles for these martyrs. I would like to tell the students that the future belongs to you. But if you should accept these challenges, please do them for love of country and for love of humanity. Thank you.